What if I told you that the very suffering you're trying to escape right now is actually the doorway to your greatest transformation? Stay with me because what I'm about to share changed everything I thought I knew about pain, and it might just change your life too. Picture this scene. It's 1968 in San Giovanni Rotondo, Italy. A frail, elderly monk stands before a crowd of weeping followers who know his time on earth is ending. They cry not just for themselves, but for him, for all the pain he's endured throughout his life. And in that moment, Padre Pio speaks words that cut through their tears like lightning. "Do not weep before me, weep for your sins." These 7 words contain a philosophy so powerful, so counterintuitive to everything our modern world teaches us, that most people completely miss it. But you won't, because today we're going deep into the mind of one of the most remarkable men who ever lived. A man who understood something about suffering that could revolutionize how you face every single challenge in your life. Now, before you click away thinking this is just another religious lecture, let me be crystal clear. Whether you're spiritual, religious, or neither, the principles we're exploring today are universal truths about human psychology, resilience, and transformation. They're principles that CEOs, athletes, therapists, and ordinary people have discovered independently throughout history. Padre Pio just happened to embody them in the most extreme way possible. So buckle up, because we're about to challenge everything you think you know about pain, patience, and personal growth. Let me take you back to where this all began. Padre Pio wasn't born a saint. He was born Francesco Forgione in 1887 in a tiny Italian village so poor that his father had to emigrate to America just to feed the family. This wasn't a privileged life. This was survival. From childhood, Francesco was physically weak, plagued by illness, struggling with health problems that would follow him his entire life. But here's where things get interesting. While most people would have become bitter, resentful, angry at the hand they were dealt, Francesco made a different choice. He chose a path that seemed insane to everyone around him. He became a monk. Think about that for a second. You're already sick, already suffering, and you voluntarily choose a life of even more sacrifice, more discipline, more hardship. Why? Because Francesco understood something most people spend their whole lives never learning. He understood that suffering isn't the enemy. How we respond to suffering is what defines us. This is the first massive lesson we need to absorb today. Your circumstances don't determine your destiny. Your response to your circumstances determines your destiny. Write that down. Tattoo it on your brain. Because this is where most people get it completely wrong. Now let's fast forward to September 20th, 1918. Padre Pio is praying alone in the church when something happens that defies medical explanation. Wounds appear on his hands, his feet, his side matching the crucifixion wounds of Christ. These are the stigmata, and they would bleed continuously for the next 50 years until the day he died. 50 years. Let that sink in. Imagine living with open, bleeding wounds on your hands and feet for half a century. Every handshake, every step, every moment, constant physical pain. Medical doctors examined him repeatedly. They wrapped his hands, they applied treatments, they searched for fraud or deception. They found none. The wounds were real and they were medically inexplicable. But here's what's even more remarkable than the wounds themselves. It's how Padre Pio lived with them. He didn't retreat from the world. He didn't become a hermit consumed by his own agony. Instead, he spent up to 16 hours a day in the confessional, listening to the problems of thousands upon thousands of people who came to him seeking help. He heard their pain, their sins, their struggles, their fears. He carried not just his own suffering, but the suffering of everyone who came to him. And he did it with patience, with love, with an unshakable peace that everyone who met him remarked upon. How is this possible? How does someone endure that level of pain and still serve others with joy? This is where we need to dig into the psychology and philosophy that made Padre Pio who he was, because this is where the practical application for your life comes in. Padre Pio understood three fundamental truths about suffering that most people never grasp. First, suffering is inevitable. Second, suffering can be meaningful. Third, meaningful suffering transforms us in ways comfort never can. Let's break down that first truth. Suffering is inevitable. In our modern world, we've created this toxic illusion that if you're suffering, something has gone wrong. We're bombarded with messages telling us that life should be easy, comfortable, pain-free. Buy this product and you'll be happy. Take this pill and you'll feel better. Follow these 5 simple steps and all your problems will disappear. It's all garbage. Complete and utter garbage. And it's making millions of people miserable because they think their suffering means they've failed somehow. Padre Pio lived in a different paradigm entirely. He didn't see suffering as a mistake or a malfunction. He saw it as an inherent part of the human condition. You're going to get sick. You're going to lose people you love. You're going to face disappointment, betrayal, failure. Your body is going to break down. Your plans are going to fall apart. This isn't pessimism. This is reality. And the sooner you accept this reality, the sooner you can stop wasting energy fighting against the inevitable and start using that energy to respond wisely. Think about someone you know who got sick and spent all their time asking why me, consumed with bitterness about the unfairness of it all. Now think about someone who faced the same situation, but said, okay, this is my reality. Now how do I move forward with grace? Who do you think healed better? Who do you think inspired the people around them? Who do you think found meaning even in the midst of their struggle? The second person understood what Padre Pio understood. The question isn't whether you'll suffer. The question is how you'll suffer. Now let's talk about that second truth. Suffering can be meaningful. This is where things get really interesting, because this is where Padre Pio's philosophy becomes intensely practical for your everyday life. See, there are 2 types of suffering in this world. There's redemptive suffering, and there's destructive suffering. Same pain, completely different outcomes. It all depends on what you do with it. Destructive suffering is suffering that crushes you, that makes you smaller, meaner, more fearful. It's the suffering that turns into resentment, addiction, cruelty to yourself and others. It's the person who loses their job and spends the next 5 years bitter and angry, poisoning every relationship they have. It's the person who experiences betrayal and decides everyone is evil, closing their heart permanently. It's the person who faces illness and gives up on life, entirely becoming a shell of who they were. We've all seen this. Maybe we've been this at some point. Redemptive suffering is completely different. Redemptive suffering is suffering that refines you, that burns away the impurities and leaves behind something stronger, purer, more compassionate. It's the person who loses their job and uses the crisis to reevaluate what they really want from life, who comes back with more clarity and purpose than ever before. It's the person who experiences betrayal and instead of closing their heart, learns discernment while keeping their capacity for love intact. It's the person who faces serious illness and discovers depths of courage they never knew they had, who becomes an inspiration to everyone in their hospital ward. Same suffering, completely different responses. And here's the critical insight. You don't control what happens to you, but you absolutely control which type of suffering you're going to engage in. Padre Pio chose redemptive suffering every single day for 50 years. Those wounds weren't just painful. They were humiliating. They smelled. They attracted flies. They made the simplest tasks agonizing. But Padre Pio transformed that suffering into something sacred. He offered it up. He united it with a higher purpose. He let it make him more compassionate, not more bitter. And before you think this is too religious for you, let me translate this into secular terms. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps, discovered the exact same principle independently. In the camps, he noticed that some prisoners facing unimaginable horror became more animalistic, more selfish, more cruel. But others became more noble, more generous, more human. The difference wasn't their circumstances. Everyone faced the same nightmare. The difference was meaning. The prisoners who found meaning in their suffering, who saw it as a test or a sacrifice for something larger than themselves, they were the ones who survived with their humanity intact. Frankl wrote about this in his masterpiece, Man's Search for Meaning, and his core thesis is identical to what Padre Pio lived. Between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space lies your power to choose your response. Let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about this. What suffering are you facing right now? Maybe it's not stigmata or concentration camps. Maybe it's a chronic health condition that won't go away. Maybe it's financial stress that keeps you up at night. Maybe it's a relationship that's broken and you don't know how to fix it. Maybe it's grief over someone you lost. Maybe it's depression or anxiety that feels like a weight you can't shake. Whatever it is, I want you to ask yourself this question. Am I engaging in redemptive suffering or destructive suffering? Am I letting this make me better or bitter? Am I finding meaning in this or just drowning in it? Now here's where I need you to stick with me, because we're about to get to the most practical and powerful part of this whole discussion. I'm going to show you exactly how to transform your suffering from destructive to redemptive using principles that Padre Pio embodied. But before we get there, I need to talk about the third fundamental truth, and this is the one that will blow your mind if you really understand it. Meaningful suffering transforms us in ways comfort never can. This is the part that our modern culture desperately doesn't want to hear, but it's absolutely true. And you know it in your bones if you're honest with yourself. Think about the moments in your life when you grew the most. I'm not talking about when you felt the best. I'm talking about when you actually developed character, strength, wisdom, depth. Was it during the easy times? Was it when everything was going smoothly and you had no challenges? Or was it during the hard times? Was it when you faced something difficult and had to dig deep and discover resources you didn't know you had? Be honest. Every single person who's lived long enough knows that their greatest growth came through their greatest challenges. Padre Pio understood this not as a theory, but as a lived reality. Those wounds, that constant pain, they didn't just happen to him. They shaped him into someone with extraordinary empathy, patience, and spiritual power. People came from all over the world to see him because they recognized something in him that they couldn't find anywhere else. They recognized someone who had suffered deeply and been transformed by it rather than destroyed by it. They recognized someone who could understand their pain because he carried his own with such grace. There's a story about Padre Pio that illustrates this perfectly. A woman came to him in the confessional, distraught beyond measure. She had lost her young son in a tragic accident, and she was drowning in grief. She kept asking, why? Why did God let this happen? Why her son? Why was life so cruel? And Padre Pio listened with infinite patience. Then he held up his wounded hands and said quietly, I don't know why your son died, but I know that God understands suffering because he suffered too. And I know that your pain has meaning even when you can't see it. The woman later said that in that moment, seeing those bleeding hands, she felt understood in a way she never had before. Not because Padre Pio had answers, but because he had suffered and hadn't let it destroy him. This is the transformative power of embraced suffering. It gives you the authority to speak into other people's pain. It gives you depth that shallow, easy lives never develop. It gives you compassion that comfortable people simply cannot access. Think about who you go to when you're really struggling. Do you go to the person who's never faced hardship? Or do you go to the person who's been through fire and come out the other side? You go to the person who knows. You go to the person whose wisdom was forged in the furnace. So now let's get practical. You're facing something hard right now. How do you transform that suffering from destructive to redemptive? How do you become like Padre Pio in your own context? Here's the framework, and I want you to take notes on this because this is gold. Step 1 is acceptance without resignation. There's a massive difference between accepting your suffering and resigning yourself to it. Resignation is passive, defeated, helpless. Acceptance is active, clear-eyed, powerful. Padre Pio accepted his wounds. He didn't pretend they weren't there. He didn't deny the pain. But he also didn't resign himself to being a victim of them. He accepted the reality and then made choices about how to respond. You need to do the same with whatever you're facing. Stop fighting against reality. Stop asking why me, as if suffering is something that happens to other people, but shouldn't happen to you. It happened. It's happening. Accept it. And then from that place of acceptance, choose how you're going to respond. Step 2 is finding meaning in the suffering. This doesn't mean making up fake positive thinking nonsense. It means genuinely asking what this experience is teaching you or developing in you. Viktor Frankl said that we cannot avoid suffering, but we can choose how to cope with it, find meaning in it, and move forward with renewed purpose. So what's the meaning in your suffering? Maybe your illness is teaching you patience and forcing you to slow down in a culture that glorifies busyness. Maybe your job loss is pushing you to finally pursue what you actually care about instead of just chasing security. Maybe your relationship struggle is revealing patterns you need to address that have been sabotaging you for years. Maybe your grief is deepening your appreciation for life and love in ways you took for granted before. The meaning might not be obvious at first. You might have to dig for it. You might have to sit with the pain for a while before you can see any purpose in it. That's okay. Padre Pio didn't immediately understand his wounds either. But over time, as he saw how they drew people to him, how they gave him credibility when he spoke about suffering, how they made him a living symbol of embraced sacrifice, he began to understand their meaning. Give yourself time to find the meaning, but actively look for it. Don't just passively endure. Step 3 is offering your suffering for something beyond yourself. This is the part that might sound strange to modern ears, but it's psychologically brilliant. When you're suffering only for yourself, the suffering is just pain. When you're suffering for something larger than yourself, the suffering becomes sacrifice, and sacrifice has dignity that mere pain doesn't have. Padre Pio offered his suffering for the conversion of sinners, for the good of souls, for the glory of God. You might not use that language, but the principle applies universally. Maybe you're going through cancer treatment. You could just suffer through it. Or you could decide that you're going to be the patient who encourages other patients, who shows that it's possible to face this with courage and even humor. Suddenly, your suffering has purpose beyond just getting through it. Maybe you're dealing with unemployment. You could just be miserable about it, or you could decide that you're going to use this time to be fully present for your kids in a way you couldn't when you were working 60-hour weeks. You're sacrificing your comfort and ego for their well-being. Maybe you're caring for an aging parent with dementia. It's exhausting and heartbreaking. But you could see it as your opportunity to give back to someone who sacrificed for you, to model for your own children what loyalty and love look like when they're hard. When suffering is for something, it's bearable in a way that purposeless suffering never is. This is documented in psychology. People endure incredible hardship when they believe it matters. They break under much less hardship when they believe it's meaningless. Give your suffering meaning by attaching it to something beyond your own comfort. Step 4 is daily disciplines that build your capacity for patience. Padre Pio didn't just wake up one day able to endure 50 years of pain with peace. He built that capacity through daily spiritual disciplines. Prayer, meditation, fasting, confession service. These weren't just religious rituals. They were psychological training. They were the gym where he built his mental and spiritual strength. You need your own version of this. Maybe it's meditation or therapy or journaling. Maybe it's a daily gratitude practice that trains your brain to see blessings even amid difficulty. Maybe it's physical exercise that teaches you that you're stronger than you think, that you can push through discomfort. Maybe it's regular connection with a community that supports you and holds you accountable. The key is consistency. Padre Pio prayed for hours every day, not just when he felt like it. He built habits that sustained him when everything else was falling apart. You need to do the same. Don't wait until you're in crisis to start building your resilience. Build it now through daily practice so that when the real test comes, you're ready. And here's something crucial I need you to understand. Padre Pio's patience and suffering wasn't about being passive or weak. It was about being strong enough to endure without becoming bitter. There's a difference between patience and doormat syndrome. Patience means you don't panic, you don't lash out, you don't make things worse through reactivity. But it doesn't mean you don't take action to address your situation. Padre Pio still saw doctors. He still tried treatments for his wounds, even though they didn't work. He still made decisions about how to structure his day to maximize his effectiveness despite his pain. He was patient, not passive. So if you're facing a bad situation, be patient with the process, but don't be passive about finding solutions. If you're sick, be patient with healing. but still pursue good medical care and lifestyle changes. If you're in a toxic relationship, be patient with yourself as you figure out what to do, but don't just endure abuse indefinitely. Patience means you respond wisely rather than reactively. It doesn't mean you become a victim. Let me give you some real concrete examples of how this plays out in everyday life, because I know some of you are thinking, this all sounds good in theory, but what does it actually look like? Let's say you've just been diagnosed with a chronic illness. Rheumatoid arthritis, diabetes, multiple sclerosis, something that's going to be part of your life from now on. The destructive suffering response is to spiral into why me, to become angry and bitter, to give up on life, to alienate everyone around you with your negativity. The redemptive suffering response looks like this. You grieve. You're allowed to grieve. You're allowed to be sad and scared and angry for a season. But then you accept, this is my body now. This is my reality. What can I still do? What matters most to me? How do I want to live within these new constraints? And then you find meaning. Maybe this illness is teaching you to slow down and be present. Maybe it's connecting you with a community of people facing similar challenges who become your closest friends. Maybe it's giving you a platform to advocate for better healthcare or research. Maybe it's simply making you more compassionate to others who are struggling in ways that aren't visible. And then you offer it up. You decide that you're going to be the person in your support group who lifts others up. You're going to show your family what strength looks like. You're going to prove that quality of life isn't about having a perfect body. And you build your disciplines. You meditate to manage pain. You stay connected to loved ones. You maintain routines that give you structure and purpose. Is this easy? Absolutely not. Is it better than the alternative? Without question. The person who does this is going to have a fundamentally different experience of their illness than the person who chooses destructive suffering. Same diagnosis, completely different lives. Or let's say you've lost your job. Maybe you were laid off. Maybe you were fired. Either way, it's a blow to your identity and your finances and your sense of security. Destructive suffering looks like depression, isolation, endless scrolling through job boards while getting more discouraged, drinking too much, snapping at your family, sinking into despair. Redemptive suffering looks like this. You feel the shock and the fear. You're human. But then you accept, this happened. The job is gone. What now? And you find meaning. Maybe this is the push you needed to finally pursue work that actually matters to you instead of just a paycheck. Maybe this is teaching you that your identity isn't your job title. Maybe this is strengthening your marriage as you and your partner face hardship together. Maybe this is a chance to model resilience for your kids, and you offer it up. You decide this is your opportunity to show what you're made of, to prove that you can be knocked down and get back up. And you build disciplines. You maintain a structured schedule even though you don't have to go to an office. You exercise, you network, you learn new skills. You stay connected to your community. You volunteer so you still feel useful. You do the hard internal work of figuring out what you really want instead of just taking the first offer that comes along. 6 months later, the person who did this is in a completely different place than the person who spiraled into destructive suffering. Maybe they both got new jobs eventually. But one person is smaller, more fearful, more bitter. The other person is bigger, stronger, clearer on what they want, more grateful for what they have. Same unemployment, completely different transformations. Let me hit you with one more example because this is important. Let's say you're dealing with a major conflict in your family. Maybe it's with your spouse, maybe it's with your parents, maybe it's with your adult children. There's hurt, there's misunderstanding, there's resentment that's been building for years. Destructive suffering is the path of bitterness. You rehearse every wrong done to you. You tell yourself stories about how terrible they are. You either cut them off entirely or you stay in relationship but poison it with passive aggression and contempt. You let this conflict consume you and affect every other area of your life. Redemptive suffering is harder but so much more powerful. You accept that this relationship is damaged and that it hurts. You stop pretending everything is fine, but you also stop insisting that the other person has to change before you can have peace. You find meaning. Maybe this conflict is showing you boundaries you need to set. Maybe it's revealing your own patterns of communication that need work. Maybe it's teaching you that love and agreement aren't the same thing. Maybe it's deepening your compassion for how hard relationships actually are. And you offer it up. You decide that you're going to be the person who breaks the cycle, who responds with maturity even when the other person doesn't, who models what it looks like to love someone even when it's hard. And you build disciplines. You go to therapy to work through your own stuff. You practice responding instead of reacting. You maintain your boundaries without being cruel. You stay open to reconciliation without being a doormat. 5 years later, maybe the relationship is healed, and maybe it's not. But you're at peace. You know you did everything you could with integrity. You're not eaten alive by bitterness. You didn't let this conflict define you or limit you. You transformed the suffering into growth. That's the power of the approach Padre Pio embodied. Now I want to address something really important before we wrap up. Some of you might be thinking that this philosophy leads to just accepting bad situations and never trying to change them. That's not what I'm saying at all. There's a huge difference between accepting reality and accepting injustice. Padre Pio accepted his wounds, but he fought against sin and evil his entire life. He was fierce in protecting people from spiritual harm. He was bold in speaking truth. Acceptance of suffering doesn't mean acceptance of wrong. If you're being abused, you should get out. If you're being discriminated against, you should fight it. If your suffering is being caused by something changeable, change it. The patience and acceptance we're talking about applies to the suffering that's genuinely beyond your control, or that you must walk through as part of your growth. It doesn't apply to suffering you're choosing to stay in when you have other options. Wisdom is knowing the difference. Padre Pio could have asked to have his wounds removed. Apparently, he did early on. But when it became clear that they were part of his path, part of what would give him the spiritual authority and empathy that drew millions to him, he accepted them. But he never accepted evil or told others to just endure abuse. He distinguished between redemptive suffering and pointless victimhood. You need to make that same distinction. So let's bring this home. What do we do with all of this? How do we actually live this out starting today? First, identify your suffering. What's hard in your life right now? Name it honestly. Don't minimize it. Don't dramatize it. Just see it clearly. Second, grieve it if you need to. You're allowed to be sad, angry, scared. Feel your feelings. Don't bypass them with fake positivity. Third, accept it. This is real. This is happening. Stop fighting against reality and start working with it. Fourth, find the meaning. What is this teaching you? What is this developing in you? How might this be preparing you for something important later? What gift might be hidden in this suffering? Fifth, offer it for something beyond yourself. Who can you help because you've been through this? What cause can your suffering serve? How can your pain become someone else's hope? Sixth, build your daily disciplines. What practices will keep you strong and centered as you walk through this? What community will support you? What routines will sustain you? And seventh, be patient with the process. Transformation doesn't happen overnight. Padre Pio carried his wounds for 50 years. Your suffering might not last that long, but healing and growth take time. Trust the process. Here's what I know for sure. The suffering you're facing right now can destroy you or develop you. It can make you bitter or better. It can close your heart or break it open. The choice is yours. Padre Pio looked at 50 years of constant pain and chose to let it refine him into someone of extraordinary love, patience, and power. You can do the same with whatever you're facing. It won't be easy. Nobody said it would be easy, but it will be worth it. Remember what Padre Pio said, "Do not weep before me, weep for your sins." He was saying, don't pity me for my suffering. My suffering has meaning. It has transformed me. It has given me purpose. Weep instead for wasted lives, for people who had every comfort, but developed no character, for suffering that destroyed instead of refined, for pain that led to bitterness instead of wisdom. That's what's truly tragic. Not suffering itself, but suffering wasted. Don't waste your suffering. Let it teach you. Let it shape you. Let it make you into someone deeper, stronger, more compassionate, more real. Let it give you the authority to speak hope into other people's pain. Let it be the crucible that burns away everything false and leaves behind what's true. Let it be your transformation. You're going through something hard right now. I don't know what it is, but I know it's real and I know it hurts. And I'm telling you that you can do this. You can walk through this fire without being consumed by it. You can carry this burden without being crushed by it. You can endure this pain without losing yourself to it. You have that strength inside you. Padre Pio proved it's possible. Millions of others throughout history have proved it's possible. And now it's your turn. So here's my challenge to you, and I'm completely serious about this. I want you to do something concrete in the next 24 hours. Take whatever suffering you're facing and apply one of the principles we talked about today. If you've been resisting and denying your situation, practice acceptance. If you've been seeing your pain as meaningless, spend time journaling about what it might be teaching you. If you've been suffering only for yourself, find a way to offer it for someone else. If you've been neglecting your disciplines, restart one practice that strengthens you. Just one concrete step. Take it. And then I want you to share your experience. Leave a comment below telling me what you're facing and which principle you're applying. You don't have to share details if you're not comfortable, but say something like, I'm practicing acceptance with my health situation, or I'm finding meaning in my job loss, or I'm building a meditation practice to help me through grief. Do this not just for yourself, but for everyone else watching who's fighting the same battles. When you share, you give others permission to be real too. You create community around redemptive suffering instead of the isolation that destructive suffering thrives on. Be brave. Share your journey. We're all in this together. And before you go, make sure you're subscribed to this channel, because we're going to keep diving deep into ideas that actually matter, ideas that can change your life if you're willing to engage with them seriously. Next week, we're exploring another principle from Padre Pio's life that's just as powerful and just as practical. You won't want to miss it. Remember, your suffering isn't the end of your story. It's the middle. It's the part where the hero is tested, where everything seems dark, where you don't know if you're going to make it. But you are going to make it. And when you come through this, you're going to be someone different, someone stronger, someone with gifts to offer that you couldn't have given if you'd never been through this fire. That's the promise of redemptive suffering. That's what Padre Pio proved. That's what you're going to prove too. So take a deep breath, accept your reality, find its meaning, offer it for something beyond yourself. Build your disciplines. Be patient with the process. And watch as your suffering, the very thing you thought would destroy you, becomes the making of you. This is your journey. This is your transformation. This is where you discover what you're really made of. And I believe in you. Now go prove me right.